Hi, everybody. Today we're going to spend some time talking about commas and semicolons, two of the most feared parts of English grammar. Hopefully, by the time we're done with this short video, you will feel a little bit more confident about how to use these items in your writing. So we'll start with commas. I like to think of commas in an audible way before covering the technical grammatical aspects of them. So, when you're reading a sentence and there's a comma in it, you should notice that you naturally have a quick pause where the comma is at. And periods, on the other hand, indicate a hard pause. So, sometimes the best way to figure out comma placement is, in fact, to read the statement out loud and here where you would naturally have a soft pause. So, for example, since then, I have completed medical school and focused on gaining clinical experience in the United States, all with the hopes of securing a pediatric residency. You can see that after since then and after United States, there was just kind of a natural pause in my voice. And if you read this without the commas, you would probably just pause naturally. So I highly encourage you to take a look at some of your writing and read it out loud and see where you pause and see if it does happen where you have commas and see if it happens in places where you don't, because those are likely places where you should be using them. When in doubt, read out loud and listen for the pauses. Now we'll move on to the rules. I like to start with the three easy ones. Separate items in a list, place after an introductory phrase or word, and place before and after interrupting phrases. So let's take a look at some examples that use these three rules. The first example here hits on the first two bullet points. So the introductory phrase is during my 1 year internship in Libya, comma, I worked in pediatrics, general surgery, and internal medicine. So, in the last half of the sentence, we've got a list of three things, and each one of those items is followed by a comma. In the second example, we have the interrupting phrase. My supervising doctors have seen my sensitivity to our patients, both children and their parents, and noted my ability to effectively relate to all members of the family unit. The interrupting phrase is both children and their parents. And we know that's an interrupting phrase because if we completely remove it from the sentence still makes sense. It would simply read, my supervising doctors have seen my sensitivity to our patients and noted my ability to effectively relate to all members of the family unit. So that little section that says both children and their parents, it's just extra information to provide more detail. It interrupts the sentence and it's not needed. So we offset those types of phrases with commas before and after. More commas. We're not quite done, but we are almost done. This is the more complicated rule that people tend to get stuck on. So there's an acronym called FANBOYS, and FANBOYS words are, it goes along with each of the letters, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So if you look at your sentence, and you want to be looking usually in the middle of it, especially if it's a longer sentence where you've got two ideas. If you've got one of those fanboys words in your sentence and it's joining two full sentences, that means you need a comma. So let's take a look at an example. I understood my ability to help was limited, comma, fanboy word, but I knew that studying medicine would permit me to truly make a difference for people in need. So you can see we have two full sentences. The first sentence is I understood my ability to help was limited. That could be on its own and end with a period. And then the second sentence, I knew that studying medicine would permit me to truly make a difference for people in need. That's also a full sentence that could stand on its own. If we want to combine the two sentences, we need a comma fanboy word. A lot of times you naturally use the fanboy word, but you forget to put the comma in. You absolutely have to have both. So you have your first full sentence, comma, fanboy word, second full sentence. We would use no comma if both halves of the sentence are not complete. So in this example here, the first half of the sentence is complete. I quickly realized my ability to help was limited, right? We could put a period there and be done. But on the second half, we see the fanboy word and it's and. If we read what comes after that, knew that studying medicine would permit me to truly make a difference for people in need, that can't stand on its own. It's just missing the word I. If we add I, then that could be a full sentence. But since the word I is not used, that part can't stand on its own. And it means that we do not need a comma because we are not joining together two full sentences. So again, the rule here is to look out for the fanboy word and then look on either side of it and see whether or not you've got two full sentences. When you do, that's when you place the comma prior to the fanboy word. And if you don't, then you don't need a comma. This is one of the most common mistakes that I see is actually people kind of flipping this around and using the comma when you don't need it and then forgetting it when you do. So try to keep the rule for fanboys and commas in your head, and it's really simple. It's all about knowing if you have the two full sentences. And now semicolons. So we talked about commas being a soft pause and periods being a hard pause. Semicolons are a medium pause. It is a little bit hard to hear the difference, I suppose, between um, a comma and a semicolon, but it helps, I think, just to even think of them as different levels of pausing within your writing. So a semicolon joins together two full sentences without the fanboys. These sentences have to be closely related to one another, and I'll show you an example. She was so upset she could not speak clearly, semicolon. In fact, she was close to tears. So these are both two full sentences. It would be grammatically correct to change the semicolon to a period and capitalize in. Whether or not we choose to have them as two separate sentences with a period or combine them with a semicolon is a stylistic choice. So maybe we've got a whole lot of short sentences that come before and after this sentence. So we don't want to have two more short sentences. We want to have something that's a little bit longer. And having a varied sentence pattern in your writing is very important. We never want to have a paragraph that has sentences of all the same length. It's better to have some long sentences mixed in with a few short ones and to change things up. This is one of the things that keeps readers engaged and it kind of forces them to pay attention. When sentences are all the same length over and over and over again, it becomes too rhythmic and too easy to just start skimming and moving past words and phrases. We'll look at another example here with a semicolon. This one says, I realized my responsibilities went beyond the scope of applying what I learned in school, semicolon. I needed to truly show her how much I cared. So again, these could be two completely separate sentences or joined together with a semicolon because of a stylistic choice. Now, there's a third way that we could do this, and that's by using the comma fanboy word. And you can see the example where it's highlighted. All I've done here is remove the semicolon, inserted a comma, and then the fanboy word and. So there's really three different iterations that we could have for this second sentence example. One is shown as a semicolon, the next is shown as a comma, and then the third one, of course, would be just to use a period to separate the two sentences. So that covers some of the rules and ways that you can think about commas and semicolons. And then I want to take just a minute to talk about citing sources, since that's going to be relevant to your upcoming assignment. When you cite sources, there is a purpose behind it. I think a lot of students get really frustrated with citing sources because it's really such a detailed and kind of um, really stringent type of thing that you have to do. There's so many rules with comma placement and italics and using quotation marks. And of course, MLA and APA can't be the same. They vary in their comma placement and italics and things like that. So the first thing I'll say is that no one has this stuff memorized except maybe people who do nothing but write research papers, so academics and people who are publishing research. Everybody else has to use the web to look up the rules when you go to cite something. So don't feel like having to do that is a bad thing and don't let it discourage you from doing it the right way. I highly recommend the Purdue OWL website for the templates that they have and the way that they explain how to do both in text citations as well as creating your reference page. Very easy to follow. And I'm going to show you some examples as well. The reason why citing sources is important is because as you progress with your academic career and you start really getting into your core classes and reading research that you're interested in, right? So this is hard to keep in mind when you're reading things that you're forced to read and you don't really care about. But when you're reading research or anything that is concerning a topic that you really care about, you may come across a quote that you find really intriguing, or you may come across some data and statistics that you you just can't believe and you want to learn more about that particular study. The only way for you to be able to do that easily is by referring to the citation within the text. And it's really like a key in a map. So as you're reading some research or a text or an article online and you see a statistic, then that's followed by the source in parentheses. Um, that is what guides you then to the reference page where you can look for the last name or the title that you saw in the parentheses. Today, since almost everything is electronic, usually when you get to that reference page, it's a clickable link. So it'll take you right to the item that you want to go to. That's not always the case. Not all academic journals are available online, and some of them are, but they cost a lot of money. So if you wanted to actually go to the library, you would need to have all the information from the reference to be able to find that document. So, all of that to say, citing your sources is important in the big picture of things, and I think that you'll notice that more as you start to read and engage with texts that are about topics that you care about. So, we're talking about MLA, and the way that we cite sources in MLA um, is actually not that complicated. You really just need five key pieces of information. But let me back up a second, and we're going to look at the left hand column. The first most important thing before you cite a source is to make sure that the source is a good source, something that's reliable. And the way we can do that is by starting with the author. Who is the author? Are they a respected expert in their field? Do they have the proper credentials to be talking about the topic they're talking about? That's usually a very easy item to ascertain. You can Google anyone's name, and if they are in fact credible, you're going to be able to find usually a resume or a CV or a list of other publications that they have done. And once you can dig up just a little bit of information to see that the person is who they say they are, you can move forward. You can definitely take a look at the date of publication. We don't want to use things that are far, far out of date. That's especially true with anything scientific or medical. Um, what happened 5 years ago in scientific fields may or may not be relevant in today's world. So make sure that you're looking at the date. And of course, it completely depends on the context. If you're doing historical research, using something that was published 30 years ago is fine, because you're going to note it in your work that this is a study from 30 years ago. So do keep context in mind. Place of publication is really important too. Something that was published on a blog is not as credible as something that was published on, say, Forbes magazine or in an academic journal. It doesn't mean that a blog can't be credible. It again depends on context. And of course, if you were going to cite a blog, you would want to make that very, very clear in your writing that this information is coming from a blog. You know, it may be a well renowned doctor who writes a blog and it's followed by other doctors and people in the medical field. That would probably be a blog that would be okay to cite. But you always want to make sure that you're being upfront with your reader and letting them know what type of source it is. And then finally, peer reviewed items are almost always good sources. Peer reviewed items have usually undergone a rigorous review by two or more respected people in the field. So anytime you see an article that states that it's peer reviewed, you can pretty much just move forward with it and know that it's credible. So now on to the nuts and bolts. Looking at the second column here, in-text citations. I have a couple of examples. This first one is something that I'm usually surprised people have not heard this rule before, but if you have made it clear within your sentence who the author is, like in this example, Jones notes that writing is the key to moving up the ladder at work, you do not have to include a parenthetical citation. You don't need to restate Jones in parentheses. That's because it's clear to the reader. So the goal of citing sources isn't just to make life hard, it's actually just to be a convenience to the reader. And if we're being redundant in our citing, then that is cluttering up the writing and not making life easier for your reader. Now, if your source has page numbers, you would go ahead and include those in a parenthetical citation. And if you did not mention the author's name in your sentence, you would include that as well. So in the second example, it says, it makes sense that writing is the key to moving up the ladder at work. And then my citation has the last name followed by the page number. Notice that there's no comma, there's no PG to indicate page number. You don't need any of that. Including that would be incorrect. So it's very simple, last name, space, page number. Also notice the placement of the period here. It's at the end of the citation because that's the end of your sentence. The citation technically is part of your sentence. So you don't place a period after work at all, and certainly not in addition to the correct period at the end of the citation. Now on to the third column here, and that's the reference page. So corresponding with our Jones quote from the middle column, we've got the citation as it would appear on your reference page. So it's got last name, comma, followed by the full first name, and then a period. And then Why Writing Works is the title of the article, and that's italicized. You can see that two of the W's are capitalized and the third one isn't. That's because that is how the title was written in the actual article. So in MLA style, you follow the capitalization that you see. You don't change it. That's different from APA style where you only capitalize the first word. Forbes magazine then is the publication, and you can see that's not italicized, it's not bolded, it's just as is. And then the comma, 13 January 2019, so the day of publication, the abbreviated month, followed by the year, comma, then the URL link. And the URL link is recommended to be included MLA style. However, you would want to usually check with whoever your professor is to see if they want you to include those URLs. Some don't want you to, and others do. So you want to follow your instructor's guidelines first and foremost. And then you end with an accessed date because that is important. And that's written the same way as the publication date with the day first, followed by the month, and then the year. The month of May is not shortened because it's a 3-letter month. The only other months that are not abbreviated are June and July. Everything else, including April, which is APR, period, is abbreviated down to 3 letters. And I also included here what like the template would look like. So author, name, title, italicized, publication of source title, date of publication, URL, and then the access date. So those are the 5 important pieces of information that you need whenever you cite a source. I've included a link here. It says more info, and that will take you to the Purdue OWL, which will show you how to cite different types of sources. This one here is for an electronic source because that's what we use 99% of the time. But of course, if you use an actual book or a PDF or something like that, there are other ways of citing those sources. And that concludes our presentation for today. I hope that you feel a little bit more comfortable with commas, semicolons, and citing. You can always feel free to email me if you have a question about a specific sentence or a specific source. I'm very happy to help you with those. And of course, if you post questions on the discussion board, everybody can benefit from them, so feel free to do that as well. Thanks for watching.